So thank you very much for coming along to this presentation where I am basically describing a meta-analytic review of the relationship between statistics anxiety and how people perform in assessments. And I want to try and see if motivational factors interact with this relationship. I also just want to bear in mind as well, this is my first ever meta-analytic review, or meta-regression to be more technically correct. So, you know, when it comes to questioning or just looking at this presentation, just please be gentle with me. Not only did I have to do my first ever meta-analysis, it was what we call a 3-level model, and it was using R as well. So there are a lot of practical personal challenges for me there, so do be gentle. So to introduce the topic itself, I'm not going to go over the literature on statistics anxiety itself too much, because we've had a series of fantastic presentations already today looking at what statistics anxiety is and what we can do to try and reduce it. What I am wanting to focus on particular here is whether statistics anxiety has an impact on assessment performance. Now, from my look at the literature, it is actually quite a mixed bag. So while some papers, such as those outlined here, do suggest that anxiety about statistics can make you worse at assessments, there are others that suggest the findings are either really mixed or there's an almost zero correlation. So there is a very, in my opinion, based on what I've seen, a strong mix or lack of consensus as to whether we can truly say it does impact performance. And I think this is a really important point to keep in mind, because it then leads to the question of whether we should really be trying to establish, because at the moment we are finding that people are, trying to create interventions to reduce anxiety to therefore then help with performance. But if we're not sure whether it is actually impacting performance in the first place, what would be better is maybe we should try and establish an overall effect size for this linear relationship before assuming interventions are necessary to reduce statistics anxiety for this purpose. So that was kind of like one of the first overall aims of my research. However, as people have really rightly pointed out, the relationship between statistics anxiety and performance isn't as linear as we really think it is. And to highlight this, one of the papers that I've really been interested in the past couple of years is a paper from Luttenberger looking at a model of math anxiety specifically. Now, Luttenberger and colleagues argue that we can separate the process of statistics anxiety and its consequences into 3 separate facets: antecedents, interacting variables, and the consequences themselves. My main focus today is looking at those interacting variables and the consequences that they do have. But suffice to say, it's argued that math anxiety it's not just that could in fact impact something like achievement, but also things such as prior knowledge with maths, perceived self-efficacy, and motivation and interest can also have an impact too. And this is kind of what I was trying to look at in this study, but in the context of statistics anxiety specifically. So based on that, my research questions were, after synthesizing the literature, what is the relationship between stats anxiety and achievement on statistics-based courses? And then secondly, do cognitive and demographic factors, such as motivation, self-efficacy, and previous math experience, moderate this relationship? So I somehow try to do a meta-analysis with a bit of moderation in it, which you may see in a little bit was a bit challenging itself to do. So the methods that I used to go through my literature, these were based on the PRISMA 2020 guidelines, where we first identified a series of potentially relevant records, then went through a big screening process to then finally decide what to include in our analysis. I went through records such as Web of Science, Scopus, and ERIC initially in the identification stage. And at that point, we removed just over 1,200 articles after doing a quick skim of things like titles for relevance. 955 records were then screened and skimmed for like their titles and their abstracts. These were this then left us with a full text review of about 124 articles. We were specifically looking at analysing Pearson's R as an effect size in this study. So one of the criteria did have to be that we could either use a Pearson's R that was in a paper, or it could be converted to Pearson's R. There was a variety of different exclusion criteria which are outlined in this Prisma diagram on the screen, such as, an absent predictor or outcome, or for example, absence, not clear evidence of statistics anxiety being measured, or not clear evidence of performance being measured, inability to access the paper, other meta-analyses, high school samples rather than university samples. We were also looking for papers that were translated, that were in English. The one exception to this was a paper that was written in French, but because I can read French, I was able to translate that. So all the papers were in English apart from one. And after all of that, the total papers included in the analysis were 39. Now, the strategy that I used was to use RStudio and the metafor package within there to conduct my meta-analysis. Now, one of the key assumptions of meta-analysis is that effect sizes need to be independent of each other, typically. However, a lot of the papers in my sample had multiple relevant effect sizes in the same paper. So in order to overcome this, we used a 3-level meta-analytic model to analyze the data, where the first level was just looking at sampling variance across participants. Level 2 was looking at variance, outcome variance, and level 3 was variance between studies. We also used an I-square statistic to assess levels of variance across different levels of that model, with the logic being that if less than 75% of the variance at level 1, which is the level between participants overall, if there was less than 75% variance between them, it probably means there's enough variance at levels 2 and 3, meaning there's enough variance across studies to justify maybe doing a moderation analysis. Another issue that I came across is the issue of heterogeneity across the moderators that we were interested in: motivation, self-efficacy, and prior experience. These are all measured in really different ways across different papers, and there's no easy or possible way to standardize it in my head. So therefore, what I actually did was I looked at the correlation between statistics anxiety and the moderator in question and used this correlation value as my moderator instead, and hopefully trying to get the same message across as clearly as possible as well. So the results that I found, firstly, I'm going to go through the characteristics of the studies in terms of majority variables that we found. The majority of people in our studies had people of a undergraduate female status around the age of 22. Locations were primarily in Europe, North America, and Asia. Most people were studying psychology, education, medicine and nursing, or social sciences. And the majority of studies used the STAR scale and used grades or scores in a module assessment in order to summarize their findings. Now, to look at the overall effect of anxiety on performance, doing a 3-level meta-analytic model suggested that there was a small to moderate negative correlation with an effect size of -0.22, and that this was significant in this analysis at less than 0.001. In terms of then looking at publication bias, just to see if there was any in the data, for this purpose, there is no way of doing this at a 3-level model that I'm aware of. So I collapsed effect sizes within each paper and looked at average effect sizes for all 39 studies. And whilst the funnel plot looks slightly asymmetric, Egger's test, which is a measure of a potential measure of publication bias, suggested that this was non-significant, and we had a particularly high Rosenthal's safe N as well. Looking at those moderating relationships, though, to really summarize the data as quickly as I can, over 70% of the variance within our model was attributed to level 3, which is between studies, giving very clear justification for the use of moderation analyses. Now, of all the papers in the actual study itself, very few could be used for each moderation, but each moderation suggested that yes, motivation, self-efficacy, and prior knowledge do interact with that linear relationship between statistics, anxiety, and performance. So in terms of what that means, for the first research question that I had, yes, higher statistics anxiety could contribute to poorer performance, but heterogeneity in terms of variance suggests that moderating factors shouldn't be ignored. And essentially what we found was, yes, motivation, self-efficacy, and prior experience in terms of that relationship can have that moderating relationship where it can exacerbate almost the relationship between statistics, anxiety, and performance. Some limitations that I found in the literature is that the literature itself, it does indicate a bias towards sampling Western female undergraduates, and it'd be great to see more cross-cultural studies into this to see if these findings can be consistent across different countries. And you could see in the moderating analysis, few studies considered the impact of moderating variables, making the actual moderation analysis limited in this study. And finally, as well, heterogeneity levels after each moderation still suggested huge variation between studies in terms of other factors could be influencing the differences between studies, even when we take the moderators into consideration, which really highlights the need to look at multiple motivational factors and dispositional factors when we are talking about statistics anxiety. And I think this is something that Victoria Bourne touched on in her talk as well. So that was really useful to hear it from someone else. So to summarize, there may be some influence of statistics anxiety on performance at a small to moderate effect size. There could be some moderating relationships through things such as motivation, self-efficacy, and experience, which should be looked at in future research. And more research is really needed across different cultures, genders, and also educational statuses.